Karoline Leavitt walked onto the plane, her mind focused on the journey ahead. She found her seat, settled in, and adjusted the small silver cross that hung around her neck. It was a simple, cherished symbol of her faith, something she had worn for years, without a second thought. But today, that small piece of jewelry would become the center of an unexpected confrontation. As the flight attendants made their rounds, one stopped near Karoline's seat. At first, it seemed like a routine interaction, perhaps a question about her seatbelt or tray table. But the attendant's expression was tense, her gaze locked onto the cross necklace. "Excuse me, ma'am," the attendant said, her voice low but firm. "I need to ask you to remove that necklace." Karoline blinked, caught off guard. "Excuse me?" she asked politely. "Your necklace, the cross. We have passengers on board who might find it offensive. We want to make sure everyone feels comfortable." Hush seemed to settle over the surrounding seats. A few passengers turned their heads, sensing the tension. Karoline's grip tightened slightly on the necklace, but she remained calm. "I'm sorry, but I won't be removing it," she said with quiet confidence. "This is a part of my faith. I wear it every day." The flight attendant's lips pressed into a thin line. "I understand, but we have policies about creating an inclusive environment. Religious symbols can be problematic for some." Karoline took a deep breath. "Respecting diversity means allowing people to express their beliefs, not silencing them," she said. "I'm not asking anyone else to wear a cross. I'm simply wearing my own." By now, the conversation had drawn more attention. A few passengers exchanged glances. Some whispered. One man in the row across from Karoline spoke up. "She has every right to wear that," he said. "This is America, isn't it?" A woman behind Karoline nodded. "She's not bothering anyone. Why should she have to take it off?" The flight attendant shifted uncomfortably. It was clear she hadn't expected resistance, not just from Karoline, but from the other passengers as well. Her confidence wavered, and for the first time, uncertainty flickered in her eyes. Then came the moment that changed everything. Another passenger, who had been quietly watching, leaned forward. "Do you know who she is?" he asked. The flight attendant's brows furrowed. "Who?" "Karoline Leavitt," the man said. "She's a well-known conservative figure, a strong advocate for free speech and religious liberty." Recognition dawned on the flight attendant's face, followed by something close to regret. Karoline remained composed, but the atmosphere on the plane had shifted. People were no longer passive observers. They were standing with her. A different flight attendant, sensing the growing tension, approached the scene. "Is there a problem here?" she asked. Before the first attendant could speak, another passenger answered. "Yeah, your colleague is trying to force this woman to take off her cross." The second attendant's eyes widened slightly. She looked at Karoline, at the small silver cross still resting on her chest, and then at her colleague. There was a pause, just long enough for the weight of the situation to sink in. "I see no issue here," the second attendant finally said. "Miss, you're free to wear your necklace." The first attendant hesitated, then muttered something under her breath before stepping away. The passengers who had spoken up nodded in approval, and a sense of quiet victory filled the air. As the flight continued, a few people leaned over to thank Karoline for standing her ground. She smiled, grateful but not surprised. She had always believed in the importance of conviction, of standing firm in one's beliefs, even when it was inconvenient. By the time the plane landed, the incident had already begun making its way onto social media. Passengers had taken videos, and the story was spreading. The airline, realizing the potential backlash, issued a statement distancing itself from the flight attendant's actions. Karoline didn't need an apology. She hadn't stood her ground for attention or controversy. She had done it because she knew what was right. And in doing so, she had reminded everyone on that flight, and soon the world, that faith is not something to be hidden. It is something to be worn with pride. As Karoline gathered her belongings after landing, a few passengers stopped to offer their support. Some whispered words of encouragement, while others shook her hand, expressing their appreciation for standing firm. The man who had first spoken up, defending her right to wear the cross, smiled as he passed. "Not enough people have the courage to stand up these days," he said. "You handled that with grace." Karoline nodded, appreciating the sentiment. "Thank you. I just did what anyone should be willing to do: defend their beliefs." As she stepped into the airport terminal, her phone buzzed relentlessly. Text messages, missed calls, and social media notifications flooded her screen. The incident had already gone viral. Passengers on the flight had shared their videos and first-hand accounts. The headline of one post read, "Flight Attendant Confronts Karoline Leavitt over cross. Passengers rally behind her." She clicked on a video showing the moment when the flight attendant had tried to force her to remove the necklace. The footage captured Karoline's calm but unwavering response, the murmurs of disapproval from passengers, and the eventual retreat of the flight attendant. Below the video, thousands of comments poured in. "This is ridiculous. No one should be forced to hide their faith. Good for her. We need more people willing to stand up against this nonsense. If this were any other religious symbol, I doubt they would have dared to say a word." Karoline scrolled through, noting that conservative voices were quickly picking up the story. News outlets were already reaching out for statements. She wasn't surprised. After all, religious freedom was a hot-button issue, and her refusal to back down had struck a chord with many. Then, an email from the airline caught her eye. She opened it, expecting a carefully worded response. Instead, it was a formal apology. "Dear Ms. Leavitt, we sincerely regret the incident that took place during your recent flight. The actions of our crew member do not reflect our company's values of inclusivity and respect for all passengers. We are conducting an internal review to ensure that all employees uphold the highest standards of customer service. Please accept our deepest apologies for any distress this may have caused you. We appreciate your understanding and thank you for flying with us." Karoline raised an eyebrow. The wording was diplomatic, but the meaning was clear. The airline was scrambling to save face. The backlash must have been swift and severe for them to send an apology so quickly. A moment later, another notification flashed across her screen, an invitation for an interview on a major news network. She knew the segment would focus on the religious liberty and whether conservative values were under attack. It was a conversation she was more than ready to have. That evening, as she prepared for the interview, she reflected on how a simple "asked you to remove your cross." Karoline took a deep breath, knowing that millions were watching. "Honestly, I was shocked," she began. "I've worn this cross every day for years, and I've traveled extensively without ever having an issue. But suddenly, I was being told that my faith could be offensive to others. That didn't sit right with me." The host nodded. "And you refused to take it off." "Of course," Karoline affirmed. "Religious freedom is a fundamental right in this country. I wasn't imposing my beliefs on anyone. I was simply wearing a symbol of my faith. If we start telling people they can't wear religious symbols because someone might find it offensive, where does it end?" The host leaned forward. What happened after the confrontation? Did you feel supported by the other passengers? Karoline smiled. Absolutely. People around me started speaking up, saying that I had every right to wear my cross. It was incredible to see complete strangers, people from different backgrounds, stand together in that moment. It reminded me that, despite what we see in the media, a lot of Americans still believe in religious freedom and aren't afraid to defend it. The interview continued, touching on broader concerns about religious expression in public spaces. Karoline was articulate and composed, delivering her points with conviction. By the time the segment ended, social media had exploded with reactions. Hashtags like "I stand with Karoline," "Janchu religious freedom," and "Inchak faith under fire" were trending. Conservative leaders, pastors, and even some celebrities weighed in, expressing their support. The airline's apology had done little to quell the outrage. People were demanding real action. Some called for the flight attendant to be fired, while others urged a boycott of the airline altogether. Later that night, Karoline received a call from a well-known senator who had seen the interview. "Karoline, I want to commend you for how you handled yourself," he said. "This is exactly the kind of issue we need to address on a larger scale. Would you be willing to come to Washington and testify on religious freedom?" She was taken aback, but honored. "Absolutely," she said, without hesitation. The days that followed were a whirlwind. News channels continued to discuss the incident, analyzing whether religious liberties were under attack. Karoline's social media following skyrocketed. She was invited to speak at events, and churches across the country shared her story as an example of standing firm in one's faith. Meanwhile, the airline faced growing pressure. Protesters gathered outside their headquarters, holding signs that read, "Faith is not offensive," and "Stop the hypocrisy." Petitions circulated, demanding the airline revise its policies and provide better training for employees on religious freedom. Finally, rights and beliefs of all passengers. We have also personally reached out to Ms. Leavitt to apologize and discuss ways to prevent such incidents in the future. While the statement was a step in the right direction, it was clear that the airline was mainly trying to control the damage. Karoline, however, wasn't looking for mere words. She wanted real change. She issued her own response, calling for airlines and businesses to reaffirm their commitment to religious freedom. Apologies are important, but they must be followed by action. This isn't just about me. It's about millions of Americans who feel pressured to hide their faith in public. No one should be made to feel ashamed of their beliefs, and I will continue to speak out until religious liberty is fully respected in every aspect of our society. The statement was met with overwhelming support. More politicians and faith leaders rallied behind her, with some even proposing new legislation to protect religious expression in workplaces and public spaces. A few days later, Karoline arrived in Washington, D.C., where she had been invited to testify before a congressional committee on religious freedom. As she walked into the Grand Hall, cameras flashed, and reporters shouted questions. Inside, she took her seat before the panel of lawmakers. Some looked supportive, while others seemed skeptical. She knew this wasn't just about her story, it was about setting a precedent for millions of Americans. A congresswoman leaned forward, adjusting her glasses. "Ms. Leavitt, can you walk us through what happened on that flight, and why you believe this incident speaks to a larger issue?" Karoline sat up straight, her voice steady. "Of course. On that day, I wasn't looking for controversy. I was simply boarding a plane, wearing a small cross necklace that represents my faith. But when a flight attendant asked me to remove it because it might offend someone, I realized this wasn't just about me. It was about a dangerous precedent. where personal beliefs are being treated as problematic. She glanced around the room, making eye contact with several committee members. This isn't an isolated incident. We've seen similar cases, employees being told they can't display religious symbols at work, students being reprimanded for expressing their faith. The message being sent is that certain beliefs are acceptable, while others must be hidden. One senator, a known critic of religious influence in politics, raised an eyebrow. "Ms. Leavitt, wouldn't you agree that businesses have the right to set policies to ensure a welcoming environment for all?" Karoline didn't flinch. "Absolutely," she replied. "But welcoming everyone means respecting everyone, not singling out certain beliefs as offensive. If my cross is considered disruptive, then what about someone wearing a Star of David? A hijab? A turban? Are we going to start policing all religious expressions? Or is this selective enforcement?" Murmurs spread through the chamber. Even some of the skeptical lawmakers seemed to reconsider their stance. She continued, her passion evident. "Faith is not something that can be turned on and off. It's not a fashion choice. It's a core part of who we are. And the moment we allow companies, schools, or institutions to decide that certain beliefs are unacceptable, we set a dangerous precedent for the future." Applause erupted from some in the audience, though a few lawmakers exchanged uneasy glances. Karoline knew she had made an impact. That evening, as she left the Capitol, reporters swarmed her, asking for statements. But one stood out. A young woman in her early 20s, holding a small cross pendant in her hand. "Ms. Leavitt," she said softly, "I just wanted to thank you. I used to be afraid to wear my cross in public, but after hearing your story, I won't hide it anymore." Karoline smiled warmly. "That's what this is all about," she said. "Standing up so others don't have to be afraid." The battle for religious freedom was far from over, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't backing down, and neither were the countless others who had found their voice through her stand.